Alright, so we got 2 episodes of Digimon Ghost Game to talk about today. Why? Because I'm bad at time management. But unlike with Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Vanguard, where one episode will feed into the next, or at least more or less, these are clearly just meant to be one-off adventures, but there are through lines going through the two of them, which we will talk about. But first up, we'll talk about last week's episode, that being a Ruli and Angramon episode that didn't end in Angramon digivolving. What the flying fuck? Seriously, this week we got Gamamon's third evolution already. Why can I not get Angramon digivolving into what is clearly meant to be furry sex bait? Like, God! But yeah, no, I actually really liked this episode. So the idea to it is that Angramon is keeping secrets from Ruli. He's doing his own thing. This requires leaving her alone. And there are consequences for that. Ruli is annoyed. She's doesn't really want to deal with him if that's how he's going to behave. So, like, you see a strain on the relationship. And I think it's kind of interesting because they contrast this by showing the other relationships. You see that Hero and Gamamon are obviously very close. What's-his-face and Jellymon, even if, like, the relationship is a little abusive, are also very close, and most importantly, they're honest with each other. They're not keeping secrets. They're not really hiding things. They just take each other for who they are, and they're just upfront about it. This is very different than Ruli and Angramon, because Angramon is now keeping a secret, and Ruli's attitude, but rightfully so, and like a lot of 13-year-old girls, is to just kind of give him the silent treatment and go hang out with other friends. Now, we then find out that the reason Angramon is going off on his own is because, and here's the big through line, because this proves my point. As far as I'm concerned, this proves what my big theory about the show has been, and that is the Digimon who are coming over here are basically forming their own society. They now have meetups. One of them is like growing food. They have hobbies. They have lives. This is developing a weird sort of like immigrant culture of Digimon. That's really cool. Like, we haven't really seen that in the franchise before. Yes, a lot of times when you have seasons that spend a lot of time in the human world, there are Digimon who sort of, you see, build lives for themselves, but this is a little bit different because this is literally a growing community, and they're kind of like being forced to live in our world and learn to live with each other, and Angramon is trying to help them, like, adapt and, like, find each other and learn to work with each other and feel comfortable in their new circumstances. And that's really good, and that's a really interesting concept, but the issue is he can't tell Ruli because he promised that they would keep the thing secret from humans, and that is kind of understandable. Like, the Digimon are obviously afraid of their new home. They don't know anything about humans or our world, so I can understand that they would be trepidatious, and Angramon, being more older and mature, obviously is going to want to, like, keep that trust intact and, like, ease them into this. So he is going to do what they want and not tell Ruli. This is interesting because, and I've brought this up a couple times before, what makes Angramon interesting is that he is clearly meant to be older than other Digimon we see in this show. So often than not throughout the Digimon franchise, the Digimon are just kind of complements to their human partners. They don't really have contrasting personalities or ideologies or really thoughts of their own, unless it's like meant to be kind of comedic or a plot point. Not that there's anything really wrong with that. Obviously, you need to basically just get to the action, all the good shit, so I can understand why you would do things that way. But then you kind of get into this thing where it means that you can't really give the Digimon lives of their own. This is that. And you know what? That has consequences because, again, it puts a strain on the relationship. But remember, Angramon has the mindset of a full-grown adult, and so therefore maybe he doesn't trust a 13-year-old girl with something this big. Maybe he does feel that he needs to keep things separate from the others because they are just kids. Gamamon has the personality of a toddler, and Jellymon seems to be mentally about the same age as our heroes. Whereas Angramon is older and therefore in a big way is kind of separate and different from the rest of the group. It's why you always see him trying to give words of wisdom at the end of every episode because, well, that's just the kind of person he is. Or rabbit, or whatever the fuck he is. So yeah, no, I really thought that was interesting, and I really liked seeing that, and that they put time for it. As for the big action plot of the episode, I quite like Repamon. I used him in Digital World Dawn, and it's kind of interesting. His tail is, like, evil and wants to hurt people, and he doesn't, and they're sort of, like, fighting. It's a very obvious metaphor for Ruli and Angeramon, to the point where I actually found it kind of boring. But yeah, no, in the end, they get Repamon to join the group and all that stuff. And the idea is going to sort of that only Ruli could have came up with that idea because Angeramon did feel it was probably just better to kill him. So yeah, that was a very good, solid episode. As for this week's episode, it's fine. It's fine. Most of it is very entertaining. Every episode of the show is entertaining. But they kind of get into some of the stuff that's kind of grating on me a bit with this one. So the big shtick with this one is, what's he called? Weedmon in English? It doesn't matter. The big vegetable one is showing up through chain letters, and if you delete the chain letter, it comes out and attacks you, and it's biting people for their moisture so they can get bigger. That is a lot of fun, and it's really fun seeing them just, like, come out, attack people, and they're just this fucking army, and they're just kind of everywhere. And that is kind of scary because, like, what do you do with them? There's so many, they're attacking, they have very few weaknesses. Like, yeah, obviously we see people fighting back, but ultimately there's just so many of them, and it kind of gets to this point of, our main characters are 3 kids. How much are they going to do? And again, we keep seeing bigger and bigger groups of Digimon and bigger threats they deal with. So what's going to happen when something gets so big that they can't deal with it? That it does get out into the city? That it doesn't just get wrote off as hologram ghosts or a prank? I would love it if the events of this episode continue on, but here's where I kind of get a little annoyed, because this is the second or third time already something has gotten majorly out into the people world, and no one acknowledges it or, like, does anything about it. Like, a giant bird thing freaking, like, caused all the TVs and shit to go crazy, and then more birds attacked! The moral of the story, kill the birds! But yeah, no, it's just kind of like, will this build to anything or go anywhere? And then, of course, like, people don't even see what ends up happening because they just transport them to that, like, sort of mid-digital purgatory world thing that they go to. And then the fight begins, and again, Gamamon gets Digivolution 3. Angeramon still hasn't gotten 1. What the hell? But yeah, no, and so then they, like, the way they beat them is the head one shows up, says that he's been lonely since he got to the human world, so he cloned himself, and then those clones made more clones and made more clones. This was more effective with Pumpkinmon, because Pumpkinmon was emoting, whereas the shtick here is kind of like, he brings his forms back and is all like, well, we swear we won't cause any problem again. And then they look at him like they're suspicious he will, and then he looks back like, oh yeah, I totally was up to something here, but I'm not going to go into it this episode. How long do we have to wait for that to go anywhere? Because it took us almost like a dozen episodes to do something with Clockmon. We still haven't done anything with the Digimon, who, like, when Angeramon showed up. And again, we still haven't done anything with what happened with Sistermon Ciel. Like, they seem to like setting stuff up in this show and just being like, oh, we'll pay it off later. And I don't want it to be that when later comes, it has the problem Digimon has had and a lot of other shows have, where we're just sitting there being like, oh, that's certainly a half-assed answer. And that is kind of the worry. I am enjoying this show a lot, but if you're going to just do one-off adventures, I'd rather they be character-focused, like Ruli and Angeramon, instead of just being a bunch of plants, and then maybe we'll see them again. Maybe all the writers will get hit by a bus and that never gets finished. I don't know. But yeah, that was this episode of Digimon Ghost Game. Again, I still enjoy this show a lot, but I feel like when you keep ending episodes with insinuating more stuff is coming and you haven't done anything with it yet, I can't help but wonder where we're going with this. But give me your thoughts in the comments section below about these two episodes. Are you excited for more? Are you interested in where the plot could go, or would you rather just like character stuff? Tell me about that below. And as always, click to like, click to subscribe, and join me for when eventually Angeromon fucking digivolves.